This video will regard the Aramaic language, a language about which a lot is said. There's a lot of curiosity about it, largely because it's claimed to be the language that Jesus spoke, the language that was widespread across the Middle East about 2,000 years ago. But it's much more than that. The fact that Jesus might have spoken it is just one of the many interesting facts regarding Aramaic, and we'll explore those facts in just a second. I'd like you to know that I also teach languages online, so you can contact me for learning German, Russian, Latin languages, ancient Latin itself, classical Greek also, and I also have my online dictionary available, a thematic multilingual dictionary. There's a link for its free version under the video in the description, and it's all part of an online teaching system. So one of the first things most people don't know but should know about Aramaic is that at least today it's no longer a single language. It's several Aramaic languages that evolved from a common Aramaic that used to exist over 2,000 years ago. Let's take a look at the evolutionary tree of the Semitic languages. Aramaic is a Semitic language, therefore it is related to Hebrew and various other Canaanite languages of the past, such as Phoenician, and to Arabic, which is the big, gigantic Semitic language that survives to our day, the biggest Semitic language of our time. So here on our Semitic diagram, we see that Semitic languages, the common mother language of all Semitic languages, which must have existed some 5,000 years ago, split into a number of branches. A Mesopotamian branch, which was heavily affected by ancient Sumerian. Sumerian was the first recorded language, the first written language that we know of. The Sumerians started writing their language. Sumerian was not a Semitic language, was not related to Semitic in any way, shape, or form. Sumerian was an isolate language, a language not related to any other known language in the world. It was spoken in what is now southern Iraq and Kuwait, what is southern Mesopotamia. They developed the cuneiform writing system. That's a long story, I'm not getting into that. But Sumerian, that therefore affected their neighbors. They were the Akkadians. The ancient Akkadians spoke Akkadian, which was an ancient Semitic language, but lost a lot of old Semitic features already. Even though it's the oldest known Semitic language, it's been recorded over 4,000 years ago. Akkadian was heavily affected by Sumerian, therefore it lost some of its features. And later on, around the first millennium before Christ, around the year 1800 or so before Christ, it had already split into a southern dialect, which is known as Babylonian, and a northern dialect known as Assyrian. So there will be a future video here on the channel about the Akkadian language. But the Akkadian languages, the Assyrian and the Babylonian language became extinct. In the south, we had the Arabian branch, which gave rise to the Arabic language in the past, and then branched off as Arabic spread with Islam in early medieval times, around the year 600, 700 after Christ. Arabic expanded throughout North Africa and the Middle East, and replaced Aramaic in the Middle East, and replaced also Egyptian and several other northern Berber languages formerly spoken across the northern African coast of the Mediterranean. I will talk about it in further detail on my Arabic language video. There is an even further southern branch which goes into Ethiopia. The Semitic languages have migrated across the Red Sea into East Africa, into Ethiopia, and most Semitic languages are actually spoken nowadays in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian branch of the Semitic family is the one with the largest number of languages. That includes the old Ethiopian Ge'ez language, which received its own translation of the Bible about 15 centuries ago when Ethiopia was Christianized. So Ethiopia has been a Christian nation for 15 centuries. and had what Europe didn't have, which was a Bible in its own classical language. I'll be talking about it in the video about Ethiopian languages, especially about the descendants of ancient Ethiopian Ge'ez, which is Aramaic. Aramaic is not Aramaic, no, not a mistake. Aramaic and Aramaic are completely different languages, even though they belong in the Semitic language, Semitic family. Aramaic is the main literary language of modern Ethiopian and has its own writing system, has its own peculiar writing system. And in the middle we have the Northwest Semitic branch. The Northwest Semitic branch then branches off into the Canaanite languages, most likely also including ancient Ugaritic and ancient Amorite, which are old, very poorly recorded. In case of Ugaritian, we only have Ugaritic. It was only recently discovered. Ugaritic is an ancient Canaanite, maybe Canaanite language spoken in the coastal area of what is now Lebanon. That's a long story. It was written in cuneiform script. But we have then later on the classical Canaanite languages, including the Phoenician dialect spoken in coastal Canaan, which is now Lebanon, and the Jewish dialect of Canaanite, which is Hebrew. Yes, Hebrew and Phoenician were essentially different dialects of the same common Canaanite language, which may come as a surprise to many Christians who read in the Bible that the Canaanites, Canaan was the mortal enemy of Israel, but the Israelites spoke Canaanite. Linguistically, they were Canaanites, but they spoke a slightly different accent, a slightly different variation, much like the Jews spoke a kind of German in Germany, but it wasn't, they didn't end up being exactly the best friends just because they spoke the same language. And they were not, strictly speaking, the same people, even though they may speak a kind of German, a kind of Polish, a kind of a European language that had the Jewish dialect, but I digress. And next to Canaanite, there was another northwest Semitic language called Aramaic. Aramaic was spoken. You see here the map. You see here the diagram of Aramaic specifically. There was an archaic Aramaic spoken about 3,000 years ago, or even a little bit further into the past, in what is now Syria and northern Iraq and eastern, actually western Iraq and northern Saudi Arabia. The tribe between the Levant, between what is now Damascus. Damascus was the Aramaic capital actually, but Aramaic was supposed to have evolved a little bit to the east. But then it developed essentially into what is now the modern nation state of Syria. Okay, modern Syria derives its name from ancient Assyria, which was then adopted by Christians. The Assyrian Church was the way that medieval, early medieval Middle Eastern Christians who spoke Aramaic classified themselves along with the Chaldean Christian. The Chaldean people were actually another Semitic people related to the Akkadians who had spoken a Chaldean language in the past, but the Chaldean language was extinct. And by Christian times, the Chaldean church was actually just a revival of the name. They weren't actually they didn't speak the actual Chaldean language. They spoke Aramaic, another form of Aramaic, which is a Mesopotamian dialect of Aramaic. But you see here that classical Aramaic, archaic Aramaic from 3,000 years ago developed into common, what is now Imperial Aramaic after the Persians, the ancient Aryans, conquered the Middle East under Cyrus the Great around the year 530 something before Christ. They conquered the Babylonian Empire. First they conquered the Assyrian Empire, and they conquered all of Mesopotamia, and they set the Jews free. The Jews were living as slaves, as we know from the Bible. The Jews were living in slavery in Babylon. And the Persians, Cyrus the Great sets the Jewish people free. They go back to Israel and build the second temple. And they also established Aramaic. By that time, Aramaic had already spread throughout the region, becoming a lingua franca, a language that, even though it wasn't everybody's language, everybody knew some Aramaic, because the Arameans were actually a tribe of mostly tradespeople and a commercial tribe, of people that were specialized in selling and dealing with products and merchandise from across different regions. So the Mesopotamians and the Canaanites and the Jews and perhaps the Hittites and Arabs and several other peoples, the Persians, Egyptians and so on, were used to dealing with the Aramaic. So the Aramean language by the year 550, 600 before Christ had become already a lingua franca. The Persian Empire recognized that and gave Aramaic a status of an imperial language. That's why we have Imperial Aramaic. That was the official language of the entire region of the Middle East, other than Persia itself, which had its own. The Persians never imposed. The Persians never imposed their language on their subjects. So they allowed Aramaic to flourish as a not only common spoken language but literary language. Well into that, the Greeks came along. Alexander the Great came along, conquered the Greek, the Persian Empire, and those Aramaic-speaking areas fell under Greek rule, and Greek became the literary prestige language of the Middle East, while Aramaic was the language spoken by the common population, by the average person, until the Romans went there. The Romans never imposed Latin too much there. Greek remained, under Roman times, Greek remained the main language in the Middle East, and Aramaic remained the languages of the people. But at that time, people didn't have much of a criterion to name languages after, by linguistic features. They just gave each language the name of the people that spoke it. So the Jews, the Hebrews, were taught by the Greeks and the Romans to speak Hebrew. They thought that they would speak Hebrew. They were Hebrews. Whatever language they speak is called Hebrew. That's the language of the Hebrews. So that's why the idea that there was an Aramaic language was actually lost in the Bible, at least in the New Testament. There is no mention of an Aramaic language. When they go into the crucifixion, they mention that Jesus, the King of the Jews, was written in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Right? We don't know if that by Hebrew they meant actual Hebrew, which was the literary language of the Jews. It was still spoken by some Jewish people, but not as much as Aramaic. Or whether they actually mean Aramaic, because by the time Aramaic had become the de facto language of the Jews. Of course, much of the Bible was written under Persian times. Daniel, Ezekiel, Ezra, all of those biblical books, they describe a time when the Bible itself was written. The old books, whatever they might have been like, either they were only oral tradition, or maybe they were rewritten during those times and they were edited into the text that we know today during the Persian times. So Daniel, Ezra, and so on, they were books that were essentially compiled and composed and edited together, as we know, in the shape roughly that we know them today, in the late Babylonian times of slavery and the early Persian times when they were set free. So that's why we have Imperial Aramaic is almost identical to Biblical Aramaic. Aramaic was that's why the books written at the time, including in the book of Isaiah and part of the book of Ezra and the Daniel. No, Isaiah is only Hebrew, but I think that I don't recall by my memory which books are in Aramaic, but I think it's Ezra and part of Daniel that are written in Aramaic, and those books are written in Biblical Aramaic, which is pretty much like Imperial Aramaic. The Aramaic spoken around the year 500 before Christ. Then we have this later Biblical Aramaic, which is also Classical Aramaic, the Aramaic spoken during the Greek and Roman times, which then came Christianity. In late Roman times came Christianity, and then the Christians translated the Gospels into Aramaic, because the Gospels were never written in Aramaic, even though Jesus might have spoken Aramaic, and all of his followers may have spoken Aramaic. We don't know for sure, because by the time the Jesus story happened there, Jesus and his family might as well have spoken Greek, but we're not sure, because all of the stories, they are in Greek. The Gospels were, as far as we know, there was never an Aramaic original that was translated into Greek. The New Testament was entirely written in Greek, and as far as the experts in Bible history are concerned, their opinion is unanimously that the New Testament, the Gospels, and the letters of the letters to the churches and so on, all of the New Testament was originally composed in Greek, even though there are some hints of like an Aramaic thinking mind behind the Greek text. There's Aramaic like a syntax and the influences of somebody who wasn't a native speaker of Greek, or somebody who wasn't that much of a fluent speaker, a perfectly fluent speaker in Greek. that was still letting his Aramaic-speaking mind shine through his Greek. The Bible was written in Greek. So when the Middle East was Christianized, all of those Aramaic-speaking areas that we now know as Iraq, as northern Saudi Arabia, as Jordan, as the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine, as Lebanon, as Syria, as Jordan, as parts of Turkey, which were the Aramaic-speaking land. Egypt never spoke Aramaic. Okay, Egypt preserved its own Egyptian language, which was during Christian times became known as Coptic, which was like an ancient word for Egyptian. Coptic, Egyptic, Goptic. In order to Christianize the Middle East and to Christianize Egypt, they translated the Greek Gospels into Aramaic and into Coptic. And that became essentially the Peshitta, which is, in the case of Aramaic, became the Peshitta Bible, which is the Syriac. By those days, the Aramaic language became known as Syriac. The language spoken in what is now Damascus and northern Mesopotamia and so on was progressively known as Syriac. So the Christian medieval dialect of Aramaic was known as Syriac, and it developed the Syriac alphabet, which was derived from the old Aramaic and Hebrew alphabets, but it was already pretty cursive. It resembles a little bit of a transitional form between the Hebrew square letters and the fluent, very organic Arabic writing. They were like between those two styles. So by that time, by Christian times, by the year 300, 400, 500 after Christ, the Middle East became Christian and became a part of the Eastern Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was split into two: an Eastern Empire, which later on Europeans called the Byzantine Empire, and a Western Empire, which fell to Germanic and other invaders, which then split it apart into a number of realms and kingdoms around the year 500 after Christ. So between 500 after Christ and about the year 800, 900 after Christ, Anno Domini, AD, between these 4 centuries, Western Europe essentially almost lost civilization. It wasn't for the church and a few other institutions holding on to Latin and to writing systems and to Christianity. Western European might have been a very different place. They might have lost all of Western Roman culture, which would then have been preserved only by the Greeks, only by the Eastern Roman Empire, which was centered around Greece and the Greek language, and where Latin had little importance. Medieval and modern times, the Aramaic language had transformed into the Syriac medieval dialects, which, of course, as a spoken language, evolved even further to multiple Syriac dialects. But by Islamic times, when Islam came about in the year 622 after Christ, the Arabs started invading the Middle East, invaded most of what is now the Middle East, invaded even Persia, which of course had never spoken Aramaic, invaded even Egypt. So the Arabic language swept through much of Western Asia, and Persia never actually spoke Arabic. Persia retained the language, but Egypt lost it. Egypt lost its language finally to Arabic. It took a few hundred years, okay, it wasn't overnight. And the Aramaic-speaking languages were also overridden as people converted to Islam. More and more Arabic became the lingua franca of the Middle East, of the Crescent and the Mesopotamian regions, and essentially we lost the Aramaic language. Aramaic was more and more confined to a few pockets of mostly Christians, just like in Egypt. The Egyptian language was confined to the Coptic Christians, which retain to this day, they retain the liturgy of their church, the ceremonies, the religious language of the Egyptians. The Egyptian Christians, the Coptic Christians, still is a Coptic, which is the latest stage of the Egyptian language. And also, if you go to a modern Middle Eastern Syriac or a Chaldean church, you also hear prayers and sermons given in Aramaic, but it's a later form of Aramaic. But the spoken language evolved into the languages we see here in this diagram. There was the Turoyo dialect, the Mandaic dialect, which evolved in Iraq among the Mandaic religious group. The Mandaeans are a distinct religious group with a very distinct, very distinct religion. Take a look at Mandaya. They have a very completely different take on Abrahamic monotheism. There was a Western Aramaic spoken around Lebanon and Syria, closer to the coast, but now it's restricted to a few areas around the mountains of northern Lebanon and Syria. And a Jewish Babylonian dialect that emerged also during medieval times and became what is known as the Talmud Aramaic, very different from biblical Aramaic. Talmud Aramaic already is a different language from over 1,000 years after the biblical Aramaic of Daniel and Ezra. Became essentially the dialect that evolved among the Jewish people of the Middle East who spoke and wrote a form of Aramaic. That's very confusing, but I hope that the diagrams that I write here, the evolutionary diagrams, help you understand and memorize things. If I were only to speak and tell you orally, verbally, what this evolution is like, it'll be impossible. So today the situation of Aramaic is changing very quickly. So if you're watching this video in the future, I'm recording this in the middle of 2023. But the latest data that I have is that the biggest form of Aramaic today is the Assyrian Aramaic. Is spoken by anything from 500,000 to 1 million people, mostly in Turkey and northern Iraq and maybe parts of Syria today. The Chaldean Neo-Aramaic is spoken by 100 to 250,000 people. The Turoyo Aramaic, spoken by 150 to 330,000 people. And the Western Neo-Aramaic, which is a very distinct, very different survivor of what was once a big dialect of Aramaic, is spoken in, as you see in the map, by 24,000 people today. This is the map of where Aramaic once was spoken in red, and where it is now what is now restricted to. These small pockets in other colors represent the areas where Aramaic still is spoken, but as the Middle East is a region that seems to be in eternal turmoil as I record this video, and there's been like Islamic states and wars and American invasions and Taliban. Well, Talibans are not there, but there's a lot of religious groups and civil wars, Iran-Iraq war, and so on. So most Aramaic people survive in. You see that most of them are in Kurdistan. They are now in the region that is known as Kurdistan, which is a mountainous region where the Kurds also survive. The Kurds speak an Iranian language, a language related to Persian. And their minority language also survives around the same area where most Aramaic-speaking people survive. Now, the Kurds are overwhelmingly Muslims. Not all Aramaic speakers, however, are Christian. Okay, some of them are Muslims. There are Muslim Middle Eastern people who speak Aramaic as their mother language. But you can see there that essentially Aramaic is a language, but most varieties of Aramaic today are in serious dangers of extinction in their regions. But they may survive as literary languages in the churches, but no longer as spoken language, much like Coptic or Egyptian happened. What happened to Egyptian? But that happened. Egyptian died off as a spoken language over 500 years ago, as this was overrun with Arabic. Moving on to the language itself, we have the classical Aramaic, consonant system, pretty much similar to what we're seeing, and pretty much what we'd expect from a Semitic language, much like what we're seeing in Arabic and what we can reconstruct to be the former Hebrew consonant systems. We have those letters with vocalic, with like a hook hanging on there. It's the emphatic. Those are the glottalized consonants. Like T is instead of ta, which is a simple consonant, you had ta. tra. So instead of sa, we have sa, 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 sa. There's a ra after. Ra, sa, tra. Sha. Those are typically Semitic. They also had tha and tha, much like Arabic still has them. Sha, and there's also the age with the little line on top, which represents a pharyngeal. That's very deep sound, a very deep sound in the throat, like ah, ha, 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 ha. And there's also the hook under the age, which is the voiceless counterpart of ga, which is ha, ha, and ha. Actually, the voiced counterpart of ah. A glossy stop like which is the reversed hook, and also the uvular represented by the letter Q in the International Phonetic Alphabet and also in most transliteration schemes. Here we see the pronoun system in Aramaic. I'm showing you classical Aramaic and Syriac, medieval Bible Aramaic, the Peshitta Bible Aramaic. You see that the system is overwhelmingly like what we see in Arabic. Essentially, no surprises there. Pretty much what we see in Arabic and Hebrew. There is an independent form of the pronouns, usually used as subject of verbs, and also a suffix form of the pronouns, usually added to verbs or to nouns to represent either the direct object of the verbs or the possessives of a noun, like my, your, or I saw him. So you put the suffix to indicate the him, the us, he saw us as objects of verbs, or his house, his car, our house, and so on. Let's take a look at what these possessive suffixes do. Like yom is the word day in classical Aramaic. In later Aramaic, Syriac Aramaic, I think we have yomah. But yomi would be my day. Yomah would be your day. Yomeh, his day. And yomana, our day. And yomin is the plural. Yomin, plural. Days. So yomai is my days. That's the plural in instead of yomini, the end of the suffix of the plural. The plural is made with n. But the n disappear as we add the I, the E sound to make the my form, the my pronoun. Yomai, yomaina, and so on. Very interesting, much like Hebrew. The same thing happens in Hebrew, in Arabic. Here is the nouns for king and queen in classical and Syriac Aramaic. What they were declined like. There was a declension, a singular and plural. There was a feminine and masculine. The melech, of course, is a masculine, and the malka is a feminine, queen. You see the plural of melech is malchin. But there was also a construct form. Construct forms were used to join a noun to another. So the king of Babylon. So the king in this case will be put in the construct form. It's a form used in possessive constructions. Like it replaces the of preposition in English. And also there was also a defined form. The definite article in Aramaic was an a put in the end of the noun. Like melech is king, but malka is the king. In the plural, malchin is kings, the plural, but malchaya is the kings. So I have to add there's a definite form also. In later Aramaic, the definite form becomes the standard form. So the noun incorporates this final a, which was a definite article. It incorporates it to its own root, and then the indefinite, the separate form, the independent form, simply disappears from Aramaic. That's why in Aramaic most words seem to be like Hebrew with an a in the end. Instead of having yom, we have yomah, and so on. There's an evolution. Modern Aramaic languages are almost all like this. They have almost all of them, all the nouns end in a. In the feminine, you have malka, which is queen. Malkta is the queen. Why do we have this T? In the end, is the feminine article with a T? No, the T was there in the singular as well, but the T didn't sound just like happens in Hebrew and Arabic. when it ends the word, the feminine T doesn't sound, but when we add a suffix to it, like a, it comes back to life. So instead of malkaha, malkta. The T was already part of that. That's what marks femininity in the Semitic languages as well as in Egyptian. Here we have a verbal system, a verbal conjugation system in Classical and Syriac Aramaic. A system that essentially will give you no surprise relative to what we know from Arabic and Hebrew. Ektuv, I write. Ektob, I write, and so on. Tiktuv, tiktuvin, that's the same as Arabic. In the past, kitav, kitvat. Take a look at that. If you know any Arabic or Hebrew, I mean, you fall asleep there. It's very, very easy. In the New Testament, we have a famous passage which actually occurs, is mentioned twice, 3 times in the Bible, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? This original form was actually from the Psalms, the book of Psalms, which is thought to be one of the oldest books in the Bible. The book of Psalms is thought to have been composed at least about 900 or 800 before Christ. And the original Hebrew in the bottom there, we see Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. The Greek transcription shows a little bit of confusion. There's Eloi, lama sabachthani, and Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, lama is why. Sabachthani is you have forsaken. Sabach is he forsake. Sabachta. Sabach is he forsook. Sabachta is you forsook. And the ni in the end is that personal suffix of the pronoun, means me. Sabachtani, you abandoned me. Lama sabachtani, why you abandoned me. Just like any Semitic language, Aramaic has the binyanim of Arabic, of Hebrew, which is derived themes by geminating consonants or adding a few prefixes and suffixes. We can derive meanings predictably from a basic root, like avad is to perish, abbad, which means that you geminated the V and it became a double B, it means to ruin something, and hit avel, the prefix hit, plus avel, and then you change the vowel as well, we have to destroy. Nahat, to go down, to descend. Nahat, to lower something, to make something go down. That's the causative form. And hit nahet is to make something go down as well. That's also another causative, but it's a stronger causative form. The noun phrase in Aramaic, just like Hebrew and Arabic, is noun first, adjective second, determiner last. And the order of arguments relative to verb is verb first, subject second, object third. Any complements come third. So the verb comes in the beginning. That's very weird for Europeans. Very few European languages have ever had a verb initial form, but Aramaic has a typical old Semitic word order of verb first that can be seen in classical Arabic, that can be seen in classical Hebrew. Verb in the beginning. And the direct object is marked by the preposition l. Unlike Hebrew, Hebrew marks the direct object by it, if it's a defined it. That's the marker of definite direct object. In Aramaic, in classical Aramaic, it's l. Even though there's also an it in Aramaic. It in Aramaic means with. The demonstratives in classical Aramaic, dnach, dach, and ilayin, and hana, hadeh, halen in Syriac. Very different. Syriac is very different. That's for this one. That, for the distant determiner, demonstrative is dech, dach, ilech in classical Aramaic, and how, hai, hanen in Syriac Aramaic. So for example, bayita tabadda means house, this, house, good, this good house. Like exactly the opposite from English. Kol dnach yoderta. Yoderta. Kol dnach yoderta. Kol is all, everything. Dnach is this, and yoderta is you knew. Cyrus is the king. Kurosh hu malka. The verb to be in the present in Aramaic, just like Hebrew and Arabic, simply isn't used. And sometimes you use actually the third person pronoun to connect a noun to its predicate. Cyrus is the king. What is the is? You don't use a word for is. There is no word for is commonly used in Semitic. So you use Cyrus, he king. Kurosh hu malka. Even in the second person, you can also use it. At umalka. You are king. And the u is technically the pronoun he, but it's used as a verb to be. If the you is a feminine, you'd have to use he, which is e is she. You say ati I malka. Malka Rabba. The king is great. Malka Hurav. That's the king, the great king. Malka Rabba, the great king. Malka Hurav. That's the king is great. When you put the definite article in the noun, which is the a in the Malka, you have to put it in the adjective as well. Malka Rabba, the great king. But if you say the king is great, only the king gets the definite article, and the Rav, the adjective, remains in the pure indefinite form Rav. Itai expresses existence, just like modern Hebrew uses yesh. Itai elah bishmaya. There is a God in the sky. La itai elah aharam. There are no other gods. There is no other gods. You see a list of prepositions there. Some of them are prefixed, like b, l, mi, k, exactly like Hebrew. And the ones that are independent are there, like bein, between, ad, im, kom, al, echereit, hot. The hot is the tahat of Hebrew and the taht of Arabic. Just like I said, the definite article is the a in the end, and in feminine nouns, this a will cause the feminine t to spring back into existence. So Medina is a province that's related to Medinet, which is a state in Hebrew, and the Medina, which is city in Arabic. Medinta, the province. Li Medinta, to the province. The relative word that connect a main sentence to a relative sentence, which is like that in English, or which, is di. That's a very Aramaic word. There is no exact equivalent to it in other Semitic languages. Heikla di Yerushalem, the temple which is in Jerusalem. The question words can be joined to di to form indefinite pronouns. So man is who, mandi is whoever, ma is what, madi is whatever. Shum elaha, shum di elaha. So di can also be used as a possessive. Shum is name. Shum elaha, you can use shum elaha, but the possession can be used only in a simple construct form. Then the first word has to be put in the construct form without any prepositions. But you can also use di to indicate, much like you use shell in modern Hebrew. Shum di elaha. That's the name of God. Here we see the numbers in classical and Syriac Aramaic. Very, very Semitic pattern. There you have first the masculine form and the feminine form, remembering that in Semitic languages, the masculine form is used with feminine nouns, and the feminine form of the numbers is used with the masculine forms. So they are inverted there. Nobody knows exactly why, and there's no explanation for it. But the morphology, the agreement system in the case of numbers is inverted in Semitic. If you know an explanation for it, please let me know in the comment section. I'd much like to know why. And finally, I put there a little bit of an extra bonus for those of you who made it to the end of the video. That's the numbers in multiple Semitic languages: Arabic, Hebrew, Imperial Aramaic, in ancient Babylonian, Akkadian, and in the Ethiopian language of Aramaic. So knock yourselves out. That's a numbering system in multiple Semitic languages in one table. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel. Please leave your comment, of course. Turn on the notification bell, because videos here are not that many, but when they arrive, they have a lot of content. There won't be videos every day, but there will be videos with very deep and unique content from my research. I'll be covering pretty much every language that any human being can cover, that a human being can cover in the world. And also contact me if you want to learn languages directly with me on the internet, especially German, Russian, and other European languages, including classical languages like Latin and ancient Greek. I'll be there for you. You can hire me, and we can learn online. You can learn from your home. And also in the links below the video, beneath the video, find a link to my online thematic dictionary, which is now beginning to include also ancient Greek. I only had modern Greek, now there's also ancient Greek. Please get to know the videos, get to know my contents. Contact me if you want to, leave your like, and we'll see each other again on the next video.